there was so much this but that, and it's this and it's that, and there was so much ambiguity that it was disturbing. That there was no way of settling on anything, and that was the point, I suppose, is that there were, I went back and forth between, I believe he's a horribly evil person, and I believe at some point he was a pretty banal person. So I kind of think he's there in the middle somewhere. And the sexual thing, that's curious, because to me there is no expression, a healthy expression of love anywhere in this book. And there's either obsession, like Julia, or her mother. Everybody's like latching onto something and holding on to it, and then also being like knee-jerking. She's in love. She admits she's not a virgin. She wants to kill herself. So everybody is kind of slightly hysterical in it, and I think that was the sort of nasty tension that I felt through the whole thing.
Yeah,
Charles,
I hear you. Charles, want to chime in?
Can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me first give you the good news that the University of Miami won 33-30. I know you were sitting at this, on the edge of your seats. I thought it was a wonderful book, and it's a book that I wouldn't necessarily have come onto. And I wasn't with you last month, but I enjoyed both of Miriam's choices. I think that Miriam should always get primacy.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the book. I want to say something about the absence of love. I think, and we will eventually get to the conclusion of the book. I think the tone changes near the end of the book, and I believe that Marcello changes. And when we get to the end of the book, we might see some of that ambiguity may vanish, and we might get a different view of him. As far as the homosexuality, this is an aspect that bothered me. I said to myself, why does it have to do with, it's not just his sexuality. Why does he have to be a repressed homosexual? Why is that?
Let's get to that in a few minutes. I would like to give my own top line reaction.
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
No problem. No problem. Charles, do you have any other thoughts?
Can I just finish my thoughts?
Yeah, we lost you. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think that the sexual issue is a bunch of hokey. And I'm sure Ray, wrote a wonderful book. And but that's not important to me. What is important to me is that I think Hannah Arendt was completely wrong. And I think that it demeaned the event. It was an exceptional event. And there was nothing, I don't know what she expected to see in Eichmann. And as far as drawing a parallel between Marcella and Eichmann, the Italian fascism was different. They were both horrible, but they were so different than the German fascism. And what's fascinating is in his book, when he travels, because he's now worried that he's going to be tried for being a fascist during the Mussolini years. It parallels Moravia's life, but in a very strange way. Moravia had a Jewish father, and when Italy surrendered, Germany took over the country, at least the northern part of the country. So Moravia and his wife, who also had Jewish ancestry, had to leave and to hide. So there's nothing banal about concentration camps and mass murder. And it takes competent people to carry it out because they made it into an industry. So I think Hannah Arendt, as she was in a lot of different things, was wrong in that analysis. Takes nothing away from the book. The book is just extraordinary. And I was saying to Miriam that I don't read Italian, but the translation that I had was just terrific. There, I said my piece.
All right. I love it when we have varying views. I think based on the experience of Moravia and his wife, I completely understand why, but I do think that he had a political axe to grind. So even if it was in the best of causes, that gave us very low literary value for me. He actually lost me in chapter 1, where I started to write in the margins, will he torture puppies next? And I might have added beagle puppies. Well, just a joke. So the thing is, while Marcello's backstory may have been innovative in 1951, I kind of doubt it. I found it already from chapter 1 full of cliches and psychobabble.
Yeah.
And so I found it dull, dreary reading. I started speed reading it so I wouldn't give up on the book. But the story did start to pique my interest when there was some French-Italian footsie under the table in the restaurant. So things got more complicated. But I will say, but back to my original point, you could say that Solzhenitsyn had an axe to grind, or even Anne Frank, or even Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning. But I think they all had much higher literary value. So, and then also, this is a portrait of an evil man. He's banal, but he's evil. We knew that from the first and second page, as Chris pointed out. But even portraits, I mean, you think of Dostoevsky's Notes of the Underground. There's many portraits of evil men that are much more engaging. So you can disagree. You can say their cause is horrible, but we get a lot more complexity, I think, with masterful authors. So, but I will say, I'm delighted we read this. I think this is a very timely warning, which I think other people have said. As in my personal view, we're living in the most fascist time in American history since FDR interred the Japanese Americans. So I turn that over back to you, Miriam. Yeah.
Okay, well, just one other question. From the very beginning, I realize this is a translation, but it was the most heavy-handed, repetitive, convoluted translation. I mean, I suppose that's the way it was written in Italian, but I would like to have cut out half of the phrases in every single sentence. It just went, each sentence was this long and went on and on and on and on, and it was like plowing through a field to get to the point of each. I didn't like his literary style at all.
So we had diverging feelings.
Did you find this then?
Let's go back. So Miriam, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the divergency is very, very interesting. I think maybe our reactions to the book might depend on whether or not we have any sympathy for Marcello. And I think that some of the repetitiveness in the flattening out really it was almost like an Antonioni film, almost had to do with the atmosphere, the historical period, the sense of meaninglessness. And unlike Ben, I found his killing of the cat and all of that rather terrifying. However, that was the point of at that point in the novel, I thought, oh dear, here we have psychological theory that people who begin by slaughtering creatures very often end up as killers. And apparently that has been, that kind of sadism, has been verified. And that's when I began to worry about this sort of Moravia's sense of determinism. If you're doing this, it means that down the road, you're going to do this. One thing will definitely lead to another.
Don't forget the maid said, very much at the beginning, it starts with a cat and ends up killing a man.
Yeah.
She sort of put it out there.
So it depends on how much you can tolerate that. And I said to myself, why isn't this bothering me more? And then one of the points that interested me so much in Marcello was when he's in Paris, there's a point, I believe, where he says to himself that he could free himself from all this, that he could escape. And I just caught my breath at that point, and I said, but he doesn't do it. I wrote in the margin, he doesn't do it. And that was somehow, the determinism evaporated, my sense of determinism evaporated, and I just began thinking more about the sort of mysterious things when we realized, or we could realize, that we could free ourselves, but somehow we don't do it. And whether it's inertia, whether it's moral turpitude, whether it's moral weakness, whether it's evil, whether it's whatever, he understands he could be free, but he doesn't do it.
But doesn't he just jump to the end, Miriam, though? He does seem, your question is, how does he change in the end? And I kind of disagree with you. I think by the end, he seems to find hope.
Yes.
And then the author kills him off immediately, saying, no,
The author kills him off immediately. And that to me was very, very powerful. He makes a plea for he says, don't kill them, they're innocent. This is his daughter and his wife. And that's a change of heart. You know, he's thinking about somebody else beside himself. He's already discovered that it wasn't important that he arranged for the assassination of Quadri, his former professor. He also has, well, we'll get into the reappearance. He also finds out that he really didn't kill the chauffeur, that his whole life was based on a big nothing. What he thought that who he was, what really wasn't. And this was to me, a very interesting part of the novel, because what does it all add up to? The meaningless of life. Now, there's been studies of this book and of Moravia as an existentialist, and it does sort of fit that pattern, that life is absurd and meaningless unless we make the right meaning out of it, which Marcello hasn't done. So that added up to me. I was interested in that. The faulty intelligence, the faulty so-called facts that he believed, they weren't true at all. And that to me was fascinating, that Moravia was thinking about these things. Now, as far as the sexuality goes, that bothers me. I don't know whether it's, he's got a bias. I said that somehow homosexuality is connected with corruptness, if you want to talk about that, or some of the issues that I've raised.
I think it was of the time, particularly. Don't you think it was of the time? You know, it was a crime.
1951.
Yeah, it was a crime. I mean, there was.
I think
there's another parallel in this, and when you mentioned Frankl and search for meaning, I don't think he was searching for meaning. I think he was searching for normality.
yes, right.
Well, what
Has to do
to be?
He was obsessed. Normality is like mentioned 1,000 times.
He's going, is it normal to go out and kill lizards? Is that okay or is that not okay? Hey, friend next door.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
And so I think he was searching for normality, and I think that at the end he was beginning to feel, before obviously they were strafed and killed, that he was reaching toward normality, which didn't mean that he was accepting anything. I think that's where the banality comes in. That I think he was a lower level bureaucrat who was trying to join a group, and the group that happened to be popular was the fascist group. Okay, fine.
Another conformist thing.
Another conformist. I'll go with the group, and I think with Nino coming back, it's kind of interesting. He never killed anybody.
Right. And that confession was meaningless.
And the confession was meaningless, and
Yeah,
the
actually,
other person, or the two people who did die, I guess contemporarily, if you're a drone looking for a target, which you identify, and then somebody else pushes the button, are you guilty for that?
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't kill anybody, he just identified them, that he himself, they could have identified him anyhow, but okay, I'm part of this game, and I'll say, hey, this is my old professor.
He's an accomplice at a minimum.
He was an accomplice.
Well, and I think also he was at blame because he was culpable. I mean, he was capable and culpable, and he wanted to kill the guy, basically. It's whether he did or not, I mean, even accidentally, was.
But to me, it was also curious that when, in the childhood era, he goes in and announces to the maid and the other girl that his father killed the cat. So he's deflecting guilt. He has his own guilt. He figures if I can push it on somebody else, that'll be good. I can get rid of it. And then he just leaves that. He never picks up on that again.
Did his father kill the cat?
No. He told them that because the cat was dead. And
Oh, the cat he killed.
Yeah, right.
Well, that's the very Freudian. I think for me the homosexuality issue is in the last part of your preamble to the questions, and that was that the repression of sexuality was the source of authoritarian personality. And so for me, I think that is, for me, the crux of the homosexual issue is then, was Marcello a repressed homosexual? And personally, I think that was part of, maybe this was outre back in 1951,
Yes.
but I think it's complete psychobabble, and it's as laughable as Freud, and I think it's very Freudian. Freudian is very deterministic, and it's as laughable as Freud saying feces equals money, right? Anal retention. And so we have a lot of these things. I don't personally see that as the case. So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Freud said that.
anal retention.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found I found his homosexuality with the defrocked priest and all to have little to do with sexuality and repression thereof. I found it to be a somewhat contemporary Italian view at that time of the rejection of the Catholic Church.
Me too.
And that this was a way of reflecting on, look at this church, look at the type of people it has produced, and that particular priest was suffering from repression, which doesn't mean that Marcello was.
He didn't have to be a priest. I mean, the driver. He didn't have to be a priest.
He didn't have to be a priest, but he was.
Yeah, he was. So he made it. Yeah.
And so, to me, I think that and saying, okay, I'm going to get married and I got to get this confession. Yeah, I'll do that because I want to be normal and I want to get married. But this is a bunch of gobbledygook. I think there was a strong rejection and reaction to the institution of the Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
I agree. In fact, when he goes for the confession, don't they ask him something about homosexuality directly? And then immediately after, and then they ask him about politics. So it was the complicity of the Catholic Church with fascism that I think was the issue with homosexuality was a sub-issue.
Were the confessor, or what do you call it, the person you're
Priest.
confessing to, the priest, becomes a little bit animated when he hears about the homosexuality part, the intimacy of violence, that he's part of the secret police of the party that try to offer. So I think that all of those were political commentaries, particularly, that were not necessarily from the story thread, unless you're trying to make a point.
Can you hear Chris okay? Okay.
Good.
Well, I
You're
think-
both on mute. Go ahead.
I think that the book is very, very important for what it says about the Mussolini period and the fascist period in Italy, and what people were thinking about and definitely trying to figure out. There's no doubt that Marcello is alienated and leading a false life. He seems very much to be a hollow man. I think it's also interesting for its distaste for the middle class, for bourgeois life, and Moravia's trying to puzzle out how in the world this could happen. How could ordinary people do the things that they do? That's the big question. That is definitely the big question. And as far as Hannah Arendt goes in the banality of evil, certainly the concentration camps were not banal, but Eichmann himself was. It's what you call a nebbish, a complete nebbish.
Yes,
Yeah, but
I think we're mixing metaphors here.
yes.
Yeah, or whatever, yeah.
Italian fascism was not German Nazism.
And Italian fascism, if you go into Gentili,
Who was sort of the mentor for Mussolini, he really had three things. He said, I want to have rejection of individualism, which fits very much into this. I want to have acceptance of collectivism, which fits very much into this. And I want to have the ultimate authority in the state, which fits very much into this. The concentration camps, I think banality fits into it. I don't think the concentration camps do, because some of our prior reading showed that in the case of the Jews, that they were exiled into areas, in the case of Italy, until Germany really took over Italy. It wasn't the sort of Italian motivation
just assassinate.
Yeah.
It was
Well,
anti-Semitic.
I agree with
Assassination.
you. I agree with you, but that Nazism was different from Italian fascism. But I agree with you only to a point. The fact is that so-called ordinary people in Italy banded together and killed people they thought were weak. They might not have put them in concentration camps in Italy, but they killed them and tortured them. That's a fact. And people like Marcello, were responsible. Your next door neighbor, who looked perfectly ordinary, would do such things.
And I agree with you on that, but I think that's where the banality comes in, which makes it very contemporary as we look at American society.
Well, today when I went out to do some errands and to walk this morning, I went by the state capitol, which is just a couple of blocks from here. And there was a group of people with American, and now whenever I see a group of people waving American flags, I get nervous. So there was a group of people, quite a sizable group, waving huge American flags, and their signs said, down with mandates. What else did it say? Down with mandates, and it was all freedom. On every sign was freedom, freedom, freedom. And if you looked at them, they were perfectly ordinary looking people. They had children with them, and I actually had a mask on because I was going to go inside in the shop. And when I do that, I put a mask on. And I got afraid for a minute. I said, gee, I'm supposed to go through here. Should I walk through here?
Well, interestingly, Miriam, you're defending the collective over the individual.
Well, in the sense of getting vaccinated. Hey, listen, I'm a person who got the polio shot. We all lined up. We were so glad that we could get vaccinated and that we weren't going to die as some of our friends did, So, these are big, big questions. These are such big questions. I mean, I
agree.
keep quoting Hannah Arendt. She also began to wonder whether fascism arose because of loneliness. She also said that totalitarianism depended on terror, you know, making just absolutely terrorizing people. I don't know. But you know, you're in a building that's full of fascistic art. You know, isn't there a big head of Mussolini in the Wolfsonian? Or some Mussolini
And
looking
it's
creature?
spinning. It's a great head of Mussolini. It's a
There's a
spinning head.
big head of Mussolini.
That's propaganda art.
Oh,
It's
yes,
good,
yeah,
all the
yeah.
stuff
Yes,
it's
it's
all about.
propaganda art, and with propaganda, you're all supposed to believe exactly the same thing.
Amen.
On a completely other direction, I just thought creating the characters of Lino and Lena was kind of like a little low, you know, the feminine and the masculine of the sexuality. And then, if you want to go even a step further, the old Brit in the limo, instead of the limo as well. But I mean, just a little bit more on the gay thing. First of all, it's, you know, the kids in school calling him Marcelina, putting him in a skirt, being so-called rescued by Lino, then being sexually approached, I guess, to leave.
Assaulted, because an adult with a child
Right,
was
right.
trying to force himself.
Gets him in the car,
Mm.
but he promises him a pistol.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the point is, does he really have anything to do with the sexuality? Does he just want the pistol? I mean, I don't know.
Exactly, I thought, he just wants the gun.
Just wants the gun. But then, you know, don't forget that she's called a coquette by Lino. He says, how did you get to be such a coquette? And that's another feminine trait, I think, that they're bringing. And then the way the old Brit in the limo identified him as sitting on that park stool as a gay man. And he had no problem coming on to him.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fascinating because he was threatened, more or less, by Marcello, but he was undaunted. He was kind of giggling through the whole thing, the older guy. So, I mean, that must have really upset him, you know, to be identified by somebody with that much experience as being a gay person. And he just, you know, went nuts.
Hey, everybody.
Anyway, I don't know. I thought the gay thing it was there in the background, and like we were saying, it's 1951, and it's probably, you know, people were not really convinced of any kind of ability to be a normal gay person. So I guess that was one of the things that convinced us all that he had this problem.
Well, what was it in the very beginning that his schoolmates, why did they want to do this to him?
Because he had an effeminate face.
Because he was beautiful.
Or different, you know. Just, I think if you're not one of the crowd, then you're going to be othered.
That's why.
And whether he's actually feminine or not, for boys to other another boy, you call them feminine. So,
And
that
that's
wasn't very clear to me whether it was because of his social position or because of.
No, they go through a description of the way he looked, because the features are very refined.
Okay, so that's why the Englishman hit upon him on the park bench, because he was a beautiful man,
Right.
probably, right?
Yeah.
Miriam?
Yeah,
Miriam.
Charles. Yeah.
So, you know, it's not like key to our story, but I think what you said about when you're walking towards the Capitol is so very important. And first and foremost, this is a political book. It is, but you know, I think we run the risk, and I don't care what people's politics are on this phone, but we run the risk of allowing our enemies to usurp the symbols of freedom. You know, if people who you disagree with or have totalitarian, fascist, authoritarian, whatever you want to call it, tendencies, are usurping the American flag. It's our flag. And I understand your reaction. But if we allow that to happen, then we basically become, bad things happen because good people don't do anything, or whatever the quote is. And I'm not telling you should go over to people and yell at them or something. But when you come over our house for Shabbat dinner, Miriam, we have a flag, and we've had it in different houses for 40 years. And I'm not going to take down my flag just because other people are trying to steal it from me. Not going to do it. So there, I don't know, everything I've been talking about is political.
I'm sorry, but Charles, but you're calling people who you disagree with your enemy sounds like a conformist thing to say to me.
Exactly.
I don't understand. No, I don't say they're my enemies. I'm saying
You
that
did. That's what you said at the beginning. I'm sorry.
well, then I use that term. I mean, if you identify them as enemies, I don't view them as enemies. I think so many of the things that we're involved with now are out of fear. And Mussolini marched into to Rome in 1922. He predates Hitler by about 17, whatever the number, or excuse me, 11 years. And when he marches in, he's welcomed because people are afraid, and that's what causes people to follow a charismatic leader. And if no matter what we say about Mussolini, he was charismatic. At any rate, if I use the term enemies, I didn't mean it, and if I did, I retract it, and I want the record to show that. Will the court reporter please read back my retraction?
Well, saying that he's charismatic is kind of like, that's what Trump is being called all the time. He's charismatic. But this morning I was in Trader Joe's with a friend of mine, and we go every week, and we were both wearing masks. And he was accosted by this fellow, my friend, who was wearing a mask. And he said, "Ooh, COVID, ooh," and it's the ridicule.
No, you were ridiculed for complying with whatever they said, please wear a mask in the grocery store, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, they're not saying that anymore. But, I'm wearing it for my own protection and to protect other people. And some of the people who work in the store.
So you don't die like Colin Powell.
I don't what?
So you don't die like
Colin
Powell.
Right.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, some of the people who work in the store are not masked. So but they're not ridiculing me for wearing a mask. And this is what it's become, is this taunting, of people. Oh, you're so scared, you have to wear a mask.
It's tearing apart society.
Yeah.
Both directions.
Right.
Agreed.
Right.
Well, I'm going to be leaving you people because I've arrived at my wedding. So thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye. No, not my, geez, my words aren't good tonight. Take care. Hugs and kisses, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye, Charles. Bye.
Charles. How about, can we talk about women? Because I have to say, Julia, I thought was one of the most sympathetic characters.
You get this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah. Okay, what do you all think?
Well, I'll tell you, she was very fleshed out in the description of her in the book, probably the most fleshed out. You knew that she embraced ugly furniture. She was very thick. Her mother was kind of like a nut, and she entirely, the thing that bothered me about her was
this the wife? Was this the wife?
Yeah, Julia.
Oh, the wife in the movie was just so gaggy, ordinary. It was like,
well, she admits after they're in the train on the way to the honeymoon, and she admits that she's not a virgin, right? Just about 5 minutes before they're going to have sex in the train. And then she thinks he's rejected her, so she goes to run off the train and kill herself. I mean,
a little neurotic, but she still was the most interesting character.
Yeah. And then the whole story about the lawyer and attacking her at 15 and keeping her engaged in a relationship for 6 years.
6 years or 8 years?
Yeah, and then writing that anonymous letter, trying to convince her that her fiance had a father who was criminally insane with syphilitic something or other. I mean, those were very interesting sidebars.
I like that.
Right.
At the same time, she was having a relationship with a girl.
Right.
Yeah, so it's.
Yeah. But she was kind of like a free spirit in a way,
I think,
considering everybody else who was so locked in some.
I thought something sort of interesting, and it probably is to me, but when they left the house, the only thing she took was this vase,
Oh, yes.
which was something that was very breakable.
True.
I don't even know if that was symbolic of anything.
So Miriam, what were you thinking?
She went through hell to protect her family.
Yeah.
She was in an abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And she married Marcello to get out of it. And she went against her captor to get out of it, all to save her family.
Yeah.
Her mother wasn't going to say anything against it. That was a lawyer that had all their family's money.
Yeah.
This woman was, terrorized.
Mm-hmm.
And
Agreed entirely. She was very sympathetic. Mm-hmm.
And, so after you've been terrorized since you're a child, you're not all there. You can maybe want to go, kill yourself when you think that your savior is going to
Reject
you for having done something that you did only to save your family because you had no option.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the poor woman went through hell, and she too, in many ways, wanted to conform.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to conform with the bourgeois, buy on installment, which reminded me of Arthur Miller.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're dying and you still haven't paid everything off. The poor woman went through hell.
Yeah, she wanted to escape from being a victim. So the normality to her was like a ticket to a real life.
And she was willing to put up with knowing that her husband was an accomplice to murder because she wanted to be able to have a normal life. She wanted to have those little things, the vase,
her house.
the house.
And bring up a child who wasn't sexually abused. So she was.
In a loving household, and she,
So
wanted love.
the odd thing was that
She wanted to love.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted to react to that with love and something whole, something nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that made her mistakenly think that he was rejecting her was the train.
Mm-hmm.
So there are these accidents that happen that have real consequences.
Mm.
Yeah. Unintended consequences.
Right.
So Miriam, can I ask, what were you thinking of when you asked him, what about his portrayal of women? Because it's a little bit of a jokey answer, but I thought his portrayal of women is, they have all the fun.
Well, I thought his portrayal of women was rather limited. We get the mother is a sort of narcissistic monster. Very, very beautiful, but very neglectful of the young Marcello, very shallow, and then begins to take morphine, doesn't she? Takes a young lover. I think also his view of Julia is in some ways critical. She's a rather limited person. And I think he's critical of Julia, and of her limitations. She, even though she was abused and wants a kind of normal life, I think in the end she becomes a figure that we sympathize with, certainly. And Lena is this predatory female trying to seduce Julia. So I think his portrayal of women is rather limited. That's my, certainly my point of view.
The later on view of the mother, when she's when he goes to go with her to see the father in the asylum. She's neglected everything. Plus, she has this kind of odd. She's like doesn't mind being sort of nude in front of her son, which was sort of like, I'm sure, shocking to the readers at the time. And she's a mess. She's just a mess. And the garden is a mess, and the house is a mess. And this is the house we've heard described earlier from when he was a child, and it sounds kind of lovely.
How she became an addict.
Right, right.
Yeah, well, I think, I don't know, maybe it's not fair to say he was anti-feminist, but he was very close. Because every one of the people, the female characters that he has in the book, I mean, he's very critical of Marcella's mother. She had another relationship outside of her marriage while she was still married, which caused her husband to stick the holes in the portrait and in the eyes and all that. She had an interesting relationship with the chauffeur while she was going through this messy whole period.
Right.
The prostitute who first comes across like, oh wow, is suddenly just not a nice person at all. Like
Louisa, the one in the.
I'm sorry?
Louisa?
Yeah, Louisa.
Yeah.
The one, and then starts downgrading her in relation to her voice and what she says at the end. And then, obviously, in France, where this lady that he thinks Marcella is becoming in love with, and then she turns out to be, I guess, perhaps a lesbian, but certainly has all kinds of ulterior motives which have nothing to do with love with him, which makes
She's a libertine.
yeah, which makes her seem like a not nice person too. So it's like, and then his wife's mother, well, she's just sort of a lot of flighty everywhere. There is no female character in the book
That's sympathetic.
that he's sympathetic with.
There's no characters as far as I can tell.
The only character, I was going to just ask that, who would be the only one that is sympathetic, I think, in some ways, is Quadri. Because Quadri is living what he believes in, right? He's living his ideal and died for them. And when he saw that he couldn't, he tried to teach, and when he saw that he couldn't teach, he went out of the country and he continued to be an activist for what he believed in. He would be, to me, the only sympathetic character.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so they
Do you
killed
guys
him.
condemn Lino? I mean, Lino's just what he is.
I do condemn Lena. He's a pedophile.
That child assault, yeah.
Okay, if that, no, okay.
There's aside from Quadri, there's no one in the novel that you would say is a well-rounded, virtuous person. And when he first visits the I forget what the rank is, when he goes to the headquarters, he glimpses the commendatories in the room, with a woman. And it's a very, very unpleasant sexual scene.
Yeah.
Remember that? But then he says to himself afterwards, and this to me was so relevant for our times. He says to himself, he saw something very unsavory, but he kept that separate from his ideas of, his work as a secret agent. And I thought, that's what I heard about Trump all along. When all these stories came out about Trump's behavior with women, people were quoted as saying, well, I keep that separate because in other ways, I agree with him. They made that distinction. Well, that's just something that men do, and they made that distinction. And that to me seemed very, very much connected to these times, that to make those sort of distinctions.
What was interesting to me was like the only moment of real joy in the book was a moment of like kind of destruction, right? When it was the joy that the war was over, that fascism had fallen. One of my favorite images in the book was them pulling these busts of Mussolini that they thought had been bronze, but really were clay, through the streets, and they were chipping those bronze busts that intimidated people were now mere clay and falling apart. And that was the only joy. That was like a collective joy that the war was over, the police, everybody was happy that the war was over.
Yeah.
And even the bust was
Activists
a
had
facade.
fallen. Hmm?
Even the bust was a facade.
Yeah. But it wasn't like, what was offered in its place was monarchism, which everybody knew didn't have much following and couldn't go far. So the only time you're happy is with the end of something, the fall of something, but nothing is like presented as an alternative. The only alternative is quadri or normal.
Well, but actually they are going into exile. You know, so Marcello's escape, because he thinks, oh, they're going to come after me eventually. So I'm going to go into exile. Internal exile, which is, after all, exactly what Moravia did with his wife. And so in that sense, you know, there is so there was that ray of hope that gets them squashed.
Yeah, but she also says, is the war really over? Remember? Because he said it's over. They're all saying it's over. And she just says, is it really over? Well, we find out.
Not for them.
Not for them.
No. He also tells Julia when she's very afraid, this is near the end of the book, he said, we'll have a new life, things will be different, we'll go to Argentina. And I thought that was pitiful. And I thought that Moravia at that point was showing some sympathy for his character. And that also showing the change in Marcello. You know, that somehow there could be a new life in which his daughter would be free. So
That made me think of Yellow Submarine, when the blue meanies are defeated, and the little guy says, you know, like, I said, what do I do? Where do I go? And the little guy says, Argentina? That's where the Nazis fled to. So there you are. He'll have to deal with the Nazis if he goes to Argentina.
But a lot of Jews went there too,
Yeah.
you know, so it's,
Yeah.
Well, a lot of Jews went there before the war.
yeah, I want to say about Moravia, I mean, this is just his life. Elsa Morante was a very accomplished novelist. And she wrote a wonderful book called History, which I absolutely love, and I would say it's a great book. So in his own life, he married a literary, intellectual woman, but they don't appear in his novel. They don't appear in his novel. So,
What's her first name?
pardon? Elsa Morante, yeah. Really interesting. Now, why does the chauffeur come back to life? And, you know, why do we learn that he never died in the first place? Why did Moravia do that?
That was the best part of the book.
Yeah. Well, to emphasize what a complete mistake his whole life was.
Artificial attraction.
Yeah,
It's been based on something that was not true. And also, you know, he made all these secret efforts, you know, to sneak into the newspaper file and get all the pages, and then check out and make sure that the article was there and proved it. And it turns out it was the wrong person in the hospital room. It was dead. So it was pointless. His life was pointless. It seems to me, I was thinking also of, you know, The Gods in Olympus, is that wonderful movie where, you know, Laurence Olivier and all the other gods are pushing people around, you know, the plebes. And they finally, yeah, at one point they just get fed up and they just go, oh, forget it, you know. And that's what happens. I mean, he's been fooling around, messing up. He thinks he's going to escape, and no, he's going to get blown up. That's it.
but to me, it was more like, what does it all mean anyway, right? After that terrible murder of Quadri and his girlfriend, they find out, oops, shouldn't have killed them anyway, it wasn't necessary, we actually needed them for something else, right? And so throughout the entire book, it's not what you think.
Right.
You know, he thinks he's marrying this normal girl, and instead she's not a virgin. He thinks he's doing this for the good of the state, and oops, it wasn't for the good of the state. Like, so what is reality? What you think is often not what it is. So it just heightens that question. And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's all me.
it certainly underlines the, you know, this theme of meaninglessness,
Yeah.
that everything that he based his life on was untrue.
But maybe what
Makes
they're
you
trying
think, it certainly makes you think, doesn't it?
if Quadri is the only, like, virtuous character, right? Because he has ideals that are ideals for the good of people, and he's willing to study for it, and he's willing to risk his life, and he's willing to give up his home. Maybe that's, you know, like Charles said, it is a political book.
Yeah,
And
it's,
also, Quadri is also, he actually doesn't lose hope in people like Marcello. He keeps on saying, you know, you'll turn out all right, you know, I'm not going to give up on you. I'm not going to, even when he's being convinced by his actions that he's not a good guy.
Right.
He keeps trying.
He's idealistic.
Right.
I agree that Moravia, of course, his favorite character is Quadri, and he is the most sympathetic, right? Because he's actually trying to win over Marcello, bring out Marcello's good side, et cetera, et cetera. But as you said, Miriam, at the beginning, if the novel is portraying ordinary people as so base, banal, and evil, I'm afraid that it sounds to me like he wants a aristocracy of the professors, the elites, and the ordinary people shouldn't be ruling themselves. So I think Moravia is kind of disturbing.
Well, the intellectuals and the elites are what everybody's going after here in the Proud Boys. They don't want these people running things. Education, are you kidding? Educating our children? These bizarre, I don't know. The Proud Boys in Miami was on the cover of New Times the other day.
Are there Proud Boys?
The head of the Proud Boys is a Miami Cuban.
No way.
Yes,
Really?
yes,
Mm-hmm.
No.
yes.
Yes, no. Are you kidding? I mean, we're really?
Yes.
How big is this organization?
Nationwide.
Guys,
Well, I guess Quadri,
what?
he has this relationship with Lena, who's a really strange person.
Yes.
That's
But she's loyal to him. When he dies, she's there, like, lying over him. She loves
Well,
him in her own way.
there was even something strange about the way she died, because if I remember correctly in the book, he was killed in one place, she was killed in another, and they drug her over there.
Right.
I'm not sure that she really died protecting him. I think maybe they threw her on top of him.
To a certain extent, Quadri is living a lie. We don't know what their marriage, whether it was an open marriage, but for that time and period, that wouldn't be very common. So he was deceived. So Quadri was deceived as
And
well.
wasn't she meant to be a prostitute too?
No.
Only in the movie. The Donnie
The
Stone.
movie and the book are really different.
Well, also, the only thing in common is the prostitute had this glow coming out of her forehead, and that's what you saw in her as well. Whatever that imaginary thing was. You don't know.
But whatever Lena's life was like, she apparently sympathized politically with Quadri
I guess.
and died for those ideals.
Well, she didn't. I'm not sure she died for the ideals. I mean, she wasn't even gonna go, and then it turns out.
She should have let her instinct. She told her she wouldn't have
But she
gone.
lived with him and helped him. She was his assistant.
I know, but she, as far as dying, she was
No, and he told her not to go, right?
she was
Sacrifice.
an unintended casualty who happened to be in the car.
Mhm.
No, in the movie, you don't understand in the movie, that's a really terrible scene where they hunt her down with the guns after they stab this guy.
I will say, I actually saw the movie coincidentally earlier in the summer.
You did?
Yes, and so I watched it down in Brazil, and and it was really, it's not my favorite Bertolucci, but I have to say, actually, he resolved the story much better than the author.
In what way?
Well, it was more nuanced. It got rid of all the psychobabble. You know, for instance, when we got to the epilogue, the first chapter in the epilogue was so filled with confusing psychobabble, I almost gave up again. And so Bertolucci could just sweep all of that away. So he made what Moravia, in a kind of fatalistic, deterministic way, made obvious and hit you in the face with something. So we go from killing lizards to killing cats to saying your dad killed the cat to I want a weapon. Bertolucci got rid of all of that completely obvious, over-obvious stuff and made it a little more subtle. It still is a very dark movie, but still. So I would say Bertolucci was a far better artist. Actually, interesting. I'm trying to remember. Do you remember they weren't killed at the end.
No, the very last scene, after they have ambushed his target, and then they chase Dominique Sanya through the forest and shoot her down. It was a really, really brutal scene.
No, but the movie returns to normal life in Italy as well. So that it has an epilogue, the movie. It doesn't end at the killing scene. Yeah, I think so. But anyway, so that was my impression. So I'm not a big fan of Moravia.
No, you do. There he is with his daughter and his wife, and you're thinking, oh,
yeah.
Like, oh,
They're not killed at the end.
No, he is
don't-
not killed. His wife is not killed. He then later on he has a child, which is to show you that he's had a no.
Right, because in this book, he's killed. And
Exactly.
And
No, he's not killed. He and his wife escaped, or was it
completely different ending.
Correct.
And you think that's better?
I'm saying it was much more artful. I'm not going into the particulars of he did this or that.
I was really glad we got one.
What it showed at the end is, his evilness is rewarded by his ordinary life, which to me sounded like a death sentence anyway.
Right.
Because he's stuck with this dumb broad who's like, I mean, seriously, like.
Is she depicted as blousy as she is in the book?
No, not blousy, just quotidian and stupid and, not.
She constantly talked about her breasts and her form, and she was really voluptuous.
She's just like a dumb.
Her hair was gorgeous.
No, a dumb girl. So then he ends up with this woman and the child and the ordinary life he was looking for.
In that small town that they're driving to.
Yes, yeah. So it's not anything to look forward to.
I must say that this book and the one that we've read, the name is escaping me, before that, about the Italian woman and the fragments.
Little
Short stories.
virtues. Yeah, little virtues.
Little Virtues and Death in Venice. I feel like I never understood the depth of fascism, the depth of like searching in the Italian soul, and I'm so grateful. I think when I think about World War II, I usually think about Germany. I usually don't think that much about Italy. And I think this book and Little Virtues have really helped open my mind to see how profoundly other places were also affected. And I feel like that's really important.
Yeah, and your point was absolutely on, that he was around a lot longer than Hitler.
Yeah.
They were really used to him, kept the trains going on time.
Kept the trains.
Well, he ruled longer, because Hitler was just as evil back then, but he wasn't the
He
ruler.
wasn't in charge.
Like Perón based himself on Mussolini. So the impact of Mussolini is huge, and we often overlook it thinking about Hitler.
Well, I think the impact of Mussolini is diminished by what the Holocaust, if you want to say that, okay, this is a big deal, this is not such a big deal in comparison, which
But this is a big deal for Italy.
it's a big deal for Italy, but not humanity in the same context,
But if you're Italian, that's your reality.
right? I mean, we don't lose 9 million Italians.
What I'm saying is, this is very important. The other, I'm not diminishing anybody else's importance, I'm just saying this is often overshadowed.
That's what I'm saying, the overshadowing comes from losing 9 million souls in the Holocaust.
I understand that, but I mean, there's so many aspects of World War. I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. I'm named after my great-grandmother who was killed in a concentration camp. I'm not trying to in any way diminish the importance of the Holocaust. But what I'm saying is, like, Russia lost more people than Europe. We never talk about that.
No.
And Italy went through something that they're still dealing with. And every time we talk about Italy, whether it's the Brotherhood betrayed or whatever, this is all part of that, and we don't give it its due. And I think this book really, opened my mind to how deeply traumatized the Italian people are by what happened with Mussolini. And we often don't talk about that.
Yeah. Collectivism is.
Well, I think it brings up an interesting point. I don't know how traumatized Italy was about Mussolini. And I think we're getting away from the book. I mean, you can see all kinds of things that Germany has had to deal with in trying to deal with the whole Nazi period. I have not seen Italy go through that sort of a cleansing process at all.
They haven't
Into banality.
Affected, maybe, not traumatized.
Yeah.
They haven't produced Angela Merkel,
Not any.
Oh, they've got.
I had a prime minister long enough to do that. No.
So, we might want to wrap up pretty soon because we want to discuss a little bit of logistics. But Miriam, do you have any
I have
other comments?
just a couple of more things to say. First of all, don't forget about Spain. Franco persisted for many, many years, and the Spaniards are still trying to deal with that. I just want to go, in my book, it's on page 320, and this is Marcello's vision of what his daughter's life could be like. Marcello asked himself, this is on page 320, Marcello asked himself what place his daughter would have in the free new future his sudden exaltation had painted for him shortly before, and he told himself with vivid affection that of nothing else he would know enough to steer her toward a life inspired by entirely different values than the ones that had guided his own. Everything in his daughter's life, he thought, should be spirited and inspired, graceful, light, limpid, fresh, and adventurous. Everything in it should resemble a landscape that knows neither fog nor the close oppression of heat, but only the swift, purifying storms that render the air clearer and colors brighter. Nothing should remain of the bloody pedantry that up until yesterday had been his own fate. Yes, he thought again, she must live in full freedom. To be, and then below that, to be that solitary flower on a strip of moss in the dark underbrush, he thought, was a truly humble natural destiny, whereas the voluntary humility of an impossible adaptation to a deceptive normality concealed only vanity, pride, self-love reversed. So there's the change in Marcello, and then they all die.
Right, so no hope.
I have a favorite line,
Great job.
which is on page 277.
Seems like me too.
It reminds me of Gone with the Wind, when Clark Gable turns and goes, Franklin, my dear,
My dear,
I don't give a damn.
Where?
And where she's saying, I never want to see that woman again, and he says, you'll never see her again. Boom. That's a little cynical.
So Miriam, other thoughts?
No, I think I will wrap it up with that. And the book is provocative, whether we liked it or not. It certainly provoked us to think about these matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so, thank you as always, Miriam. Interestingly, we ended up the year of many books on death with yet one more. I will say that this was slightly more political than some of the prior books, and maybe a little less literary in my personal view. Interestingly, our first meeting back in the Wolf after what, a year and 3/4 or 2/3, dealt with propaganda. So we have a lot of propagandistic art in this museum, and that is a cautionary tale. And so this book is also a cautionary tale. I think it's a very bleak and, in fact, existential one, but it's still a cautionary tale. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. So I think I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can do some